I'm going to talk fairly fast. I apologize. This will be available for you, as I understand, at the end. And I'll also give my email address, so if you have any questions, you can email me, okay? So as he said, my name is Erin Brown. I recently finished my PhD at UCLA in American History. So I'm really excited to see that, thank you. I'm really happy to see that there is a new crop of soon-to-be scholars that will be heading into the pipeline. I work now with UCLA's Career Center. I work almost entirely with masters and PhD, actually entirely with masters and PhD students, almost entirely with PhD students on North Campus. So social scientists and humanists, arts, and educators. We're going to talk today about the CV and resume. A quick question for you, just to raise your hands. How many of you currently have a resume? Nice. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of a summary on what resumes are all about. How many of you have... Ooh, what is that?
I'm unsure.
Okay, stop.
So sorry.
How many of you have a CV? That's actually great. Okay. So let's get moving here. I was going to have you do this exercise, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to instead tell you the average reviewer of a CV or a resume will only spend about 15 seconds on the document. 15 seconds, okay? So that means that you have to develop CVs and resumes that are instantly recognizable. This is not a time to get creative and think outside the box, right? We really want to provide documents that look exactly like the genre they're supposed to be, okay? And we need to set them up in a way that within 15 seconds, the information that you most want to provide to the reader is available to them. Sorry. That's okay. So we're going to be talking about the best ways to do that. Okay, so resume, CV. Who knows the difference between the two? Actually, we're not going to. I'm going to ask one. Yeah.
Does CV usually include more of your research and what you've done related to projects and such stuff like that?
Right. Yes. So, we're moving through here really quickly. Is anybody else getting that feedback? Everybody else is okay? They can hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because I'm getting feedback here. So a CV, yes, is going to talk more about your scholarly accomplishments, okay? In fact, a CV is a record of your entire scholarly life. And that includes your academic and educational background, it includes teaching experience, it includes all of your research experience, as well as any publications, presentations, awards, honors. And this is really an important thing that isn't on here. It also includes all of your service that might pertain to a career in academia. Okay, so those of you that are in the social sciences, and I understand most of you are social scientists, are really going to want to consider what kinds of volunteer activities have you done that have been either on campus or off campus that speak in some way to the kinds of things that you care about in your research. All right? Having your service tied to your research is actually a really great thing. The resume, on the other hand, is what we use to get a job outside of academia, right? Resumes are really important. I'm glad to see almost everyone has one. You want to keep a resume at all times because you don't know, and you want to keep it up to date, because you don't know if suddenly somebody's going to come up to you and offer you something really exciting, a part-time job, an internship, right? Having a resume that is up to date can help you get those experiences, and those experiences can look good on your CV later on, okay? But the important thing with a resume is that while I just said have one on you at all times, have a big broad spectrum resume, the best resumes are the ones that are actually tailored for a specific job that you are going after, okay? And in a resume, we're not talking about everything you've done, certainly not everything you've done in your education, but we're talking about certain specific things that would make you interesting to that employer, right? So they want to know about your education to a degree, but they really want to know about your experience and your skills. Okay, so this is a great breakdown, and I'm sorry, I'm really not used to being tied to a podium or not asking you all questions. So if I feel like I'm moving a little bit, it's because I'm trying to stay anchored here. But as I just said, a CV is when we're talking about our academic life. A CV you will use when you're applying to graduate school, you will use when you're applying for fellowships, and you will use when you're applying for academic jobs. Resumes are for the rest of your life, okay? Part-time jobs, internships, and if you decide to go outside of the academy to get a job, all of that is where you use a resume. The CV is really important when we're thinking about describing to someone how our academic achievements speak to our scholarly potential, okay? So you'll see here where it says focus, your academic achievements and your scholarly potential. Actually, what I would prefer to say here is how what you have already done as an academic demonstrates what you will do as a future academic. Does that make sense? Okay. Whereas with a resume, it is just a sign that, like, hey, I have all these skills that are exactly what you want right now from me as an employee, all right? A couple of important things to note. With a CV, you have all the space in the world. If you want an 8-page CV, you can have an 8-page CV. With a resume, really, especially at your age, you really only want 1 page. Arguably, you can go to 2 pages, but realistically, almost everyone, including me, and I'm 48 years old, has a 1-page resume, okay? And you really need to tailor it to the audience that you're speaking to the position that you're ultimately going for. Okay, so growing your CV. Sorry. This is when we have more time. Okay, the important point here is that with a CV, every time you do something, every time you receive a new award, you should be updating your CV. And your CV, you probably aren't going to delete anything from, all right? So just keep building it. It's nice to have a dated CV, so that every time you update it, you change the date, so that not only do you know which is the most up-to-date CV, but anybody that you've worked with over time knows that you've updated your CV, right? So that could be a faculty mentor, that could be a primary investigator in a lab, right? It could be the dean, it could be your work study. Those kinds of things, it's helpful for them to know whenever you've updated it. Anytime you get an award, anytime you publish a paper, anytime you go to a presentation, present a poster, anything like that, you better update it, okay? Okay, so the components of a CV. I think most of this is pretty clear. A couple of things that I do want to point out, though. When you are in a PhD program, you will want to include the address of your academic department, okay? Until then, even when you're in a master's program, do not include your department address. So that's something once you move into the PhD program you'll want to add. Another thing that I do want to point out to you, it's really important when you are writing where your education is. You'll see that it says expected June 2016. And then below it, the bachelor's degree, or I'm sorry, the AA, it just says the year, right? When you have yet to graduate, it's really important that you be specific about the month that you're going to graduate. A lot of graduate schools will want to know when you will officially matriculate, okay? So make sure you put the month when you're talking about a program that you're in, and put the year once you've graduated. Okay. More CV components. I will tell you that this is the order that we recommend putting things in, okay? So CVs are built around 3 important things. They're built around research, teaching, and service, okay? For most of you who will be using your CVs to apply for master's and PhD programs, you won't have a lot of teaching experience, and that's okay. They don't expect you to. If you do have some teaching experience, or if you have some mentoring experience, that's important to put in, okay? But it's not as important as your research. Your research goes first. So you'll note that after you put your education, where you've gotten your degrees, then we give all the honors and awards we've gotten, right? Then we move into publications, conference presentations. These are the ways that we represent that we are these are the ways to represent our research, right? The products of our research are generally papers and presentations. The other thing that you can put in here is you can put in, if you have done research, if you have worked on a research project for a professor, if you've been a part of a research consortium, or if you've been a part of a research lab, if you've been an undergraduate research assistant, that can go in too. I would put that in under conference presentations, okay? So after you do conference presentations, put in another heading, and that would be research experience, all right? Teaching experience comes next. Don't worry if you don't have anything when you are applying to graduate school. It's not a big deal. But when you are coming out of graduate school, then you want to make sure that you do have some teaching experience. Languages come next. Do I have any people here who are English is not their first language? Okay, how many people were raised in bilingual households? Okay, so those of you that have been raised in bilingual households, you want to put your non-English language first, okay? And put in parentheses, native, and then underneath that, put English. I know that sounds strange, we're in America, but put English and then put it in parentheses, also native, all right? That shows that you are bilingual. That's actually a plus, okay? And then put any other languages that you know. You'll note here that if you are fluent in a language, so for example, if you grew up in a household where you spoke English, but you are now fluent in Spanish or Mandarin, you do not put native, you put fluent. And then if you have languages that you are somewhat proficient in, you don't want to put proficient in your CV. What you do want to put is how you are proficient. So are you conversationally proficient? Are you reading proficient? Are you reading and writing proficient? Okay? You absolutely can if you're learning a language right now. So let's say you've decided to pick up Japanese, and you don't feel terribly confident that you could read or speak in it. That's okay. What you can do is you can put in parentheses basic. All right? Then we move into service, and you'll note here that this just says departmental service. What I recommend doing is having departmental service first. So that's any time in the university, in your departments, that you have served on a committee, that you have helped organize a conference, that you have been a part of one of the department's undertakings, right? But then under that, I would put additional service or community service or campus service. You can define it however you want, but that should come after departmental service. And that's what I said to you earlier, right? It's really important to get those things in, especially when you're applying to graduate schools, because that speaks to your engagement with the community. We really like to see that when we see people that are applying to graduate school. It gives us a picture of a much more well-rounded candidate, okay? You'll note that at no point in a CV do we really describe anything, right? We're basically just saying, this was the fellowship I got, right? I TA'd at one point. I wrote this paper, right? But there's no accomplishment statements that you guys are probably familiar with your resumes. We don't generally include accomplishment statements in a CV. We try and keep that kind of verbiage very, very short. And the only place that you will see that is if you need to describe, say, what your research was. So remember how I talked about just a few minutes ago? that if you have some research experience, if you've been connected to a lab, right? If you helped develop a survey for, say, your Soc professor, right? That those things you may need to describe, right? Especially if you were the one that had to go through IRB training, or if you're the one who administered the survey to 200 people, right? Those places you can actually give a description of what you've accomplished, but the rest of the time we don't want to know how many students you had in your class when you were a TA. We don't care what the subject matter was that you did TA. We just want to know the class title, okay? And how many quarters or semesters you were the TA. Does that make sense? It's very different than a resume because we're not nearly as interested in the kinds of skills that you have. We're far more interested in the fact that you've actually accomplished this, right? That we can kind of check it off our boxes. Remember this 15 seconds read through. They want to see as much as they possibly can. They don't want to get bogged down in your accomplishments. The other thing that I was going to mention to you is language or other skills. Those of you that have coding skills or are comfortable with certain software packages, that's another thing that you want to include. So for social scientists, a lot of times it's statistical software, right? Or databases that you may be managing. If you have any of that, you want to put that in your language or other skills. And what I would head that section is skills, okay? And then you can put languages as one line item, and the other line item can be computer languages or software skills or statistical modeling software packages, something like that, all right? And then last but not least, putting your professional memberships on is actually helpful too. I'm running through these really, really fast. I apologize. Okay, so as I said early on, when you think about a selection committee, they are going to be reading hundreds of applications for any graduate school that you are applying to, right? So if you don't put things in the order that they expect to see them, or if you have a whole bunch of information that they don't view relevant, it's a really easy way for them to say, yeah, this person doesn't have what we need, okay? Stick with the genre because the genre will help you move forward in the process. Okay, as I said, they're going to be looking for specific things, and if you have them in the right places and they can identify them, then they're going to see that you have the minimum requirements that they're looking for, right? That keeps you in the stack, that keeps you in the running. The other thing that they're going to look for, and the reason why we want awards so high up, is because that's one of the first things they're going to look for, because that shows them that you've been successful, right? So any scholarships that you have collected, any fellowships that you have earned, any awards that you have collected along the way are indicators that you are academically viable as a candidate for a master's or PhD program. The nice to haves are the service things, right? Because those show us that you're a well-rounded candidate. Those show us that you're somebody that we would like to have in our program, right? That we would enjoy speaking to you. So those are kind of the nice to haves. Okay. One smart way to handle this, and I always get this question with CVs, what should my CV look like? CVs and resumes actually look quite a bit different in terms of their formatting. What I strongly recommend is that you look for some sample CVs. The best place to look for them is if you go to a college website to their career services. And what you can do is oftentimes find examples of their CVs that they recommend on their websites, okay? But even better than that is to try and get a hold of CVs from the departments that you want to apply to, all right? So if you want to come to UCLA and be an anthropology major, try and get a hold of a copy of a CV, whether it's faculty or whether it's a current graduate student, so that you can see an example of what worked. And the reason why I recommend this is not just because you want to have the formatting correct, just to keep you in the bucket, right? But it's also a great way to assess what made them a successful candidate. What kinds of things did they have on their CV that allowed them to get into this program, that allowed them to get a position as a tenure-track professor at UCLA, okay? And what you can do is once you look at that CV, you can say, oh, wow, so they did a couple of presentations at the American Anthropological Association, and they did 2 posters when they were undergrads. Okay, I need to get my posters going. I need to find a way to get to the American Anthropological Association meeting, right? You can look through there and you can see, oh, wow, they're publishing, and they all seem to be publishing in a couple of specific journals. That's where I want to get published, right? Or they went after this fellowship. That's a fellowship I should try to get, okay? So checking out what they have on their CVs can tell you what you should try to get. One of the best ways to handle this, though, when you're applying to graduate schools, and this is true when we move into the resume in just a few minutes, is to try and develop connections. A CV, they only look at for 15 seconds. But if a professor says, I want to work with a student, then they're really interested in you, right? A professor saying, I want to work with this student means more than your GPA, means more than your GRE scores, okay? So this third point that I'm making here about connections, networking is important when we're talking about graduate school, when we're talking about outside of academia, and when we're talking about life in general. Who you know means something. You don't need to know them well. You just need to reach out and make contact so that you have a connection, all right? So those of you that are looking at going into master's and PhD programs, investigate the program that you are applying to, okay? Figure out what professors are there that you want to work with. Reach out to those professors. Send them an email. Introduce yourself. Tell them that you really appreciated the article they wrote on X, Y, or Z, and that you're actually using it in a paper in class, okay? Those kinds of connections can really help you move forward. Sometimes those connections can even wind up on your CV under your list of references, okay? Those can be people who, they're not going to write you a recommendation necessarily. They won't write you a recommendation unless they've actually worked with you. But if they are willing, you can put them down as someone who's willing to speak up for you, okay? And that can really help you get into a program. Okay, so we're going to move on to resume. And I feel very strange not asking you guys if you have questions. So bear with me. A resume is different, right? A resume is all about information that is relevant to the job you are currently applying for. You should all have a broad spectrum resume, one that you have just in case somebody says, hey, do you have a resume? I'd love to hand this along to a friend of mine, right? You should always have a resume ready to go. But the best resumes are the resumes that are tailored to specific jobs. So as you are applying for specific internships or specific part-time jobs, you will want to have resumes that speak specifically to the skills that they are looking for. As I said, a resume is only one page. You'll see that some things look very, very similar, right? Education, for example, looks very similar. By the way, I have had this question asked of me. Should I put down my community college experience, even if I didn't graduate from a community college? Yes. Yes for the CV, yes for the resume. I don't know a corporate recruiter or an academic who does not respect somebody who went to a community college. Going to a community college suggests that you have persistence and that you have overcome some kind of a barrier. Financially, academically, you have done something with your life to get through to a 4-year school, you had to work through a community college. That excites almost everybody. As I said, I haven't met anybody yet who does not respect somebody who started in a community college. And it can actually give you a foot up, okay? So even if you don't get the AA, if you transfer before you get the AA, keep your community college experience there, all right? Now, you'll notice when we talk about experience, when we're talking about the resume, suddenly you get to describe your experience, right? And that's really, really important. And we're going to go over that really quickly in a few minutes. But you'll notice now suddenly honors and awards drops really low, right? It's almost at the end of a resume. And in fact, oftentimes, if you don't have the space, I will have you take off your honors and awards, because employers are far less interested in awards than academics are. They're far more interested in the skills that you have, okay? Leadership and service, on the other hand, are really important. I can't imagine an employer out there that isn't interested in someone who has stepped up to be a leader at some point. They're also very interested in the fact that you have volunteered. And in fact, whether you are paid to do something or whether you are a volunteer, that's experience. Okay, so a lot of times we will have you move that volunteer experience, right? If you acted as a coordinator for a student group, we will have you move that into the experience section, because you're demonstrating leadership skills, you're demonstrating project management skills, okay? And last but not least, really important, are skills on a resume. So that what I told you about languages for the CV counts here as well. We really like to see languages. We really like to see computer languages. This is also a place, if you have other certifications that would be of value to that employer, to put those certifications down, okay? Format. Resume is 1 page. The margins, however, on a CV have to stay at 1 inch all the way around, right? The margins on a resume can be down to a 1/2 inch, and that includes all the way down at the bottom, okay? The font size can be smaller on a resume because you only have 1 page to work with. However, don't get crazy. If I can't read it with my glasses, believe me, no recruiter is going to read it. And they only have 15 seconds to read it, right? So you need to make sure that they're not squinting trying to figure out what that word is. Traditional font. Do not use Times New Roman. Calibri is now kind of the industry standard. It's what comes on your Microsoft Word, right? It's the default. Go with Calibri. It's far more modern, and it's still a compact font. Avoid using too many of the effects. Bolding, underlining, and italicizing can be great for a subject heading, but too much of it makes it really hard to read. The other thing is that you want all of your dates right aligned on the edge of your resume, okay? With a CV, you can actually move them around. We don't have as many problems with that. But on a resume, they absolutely have to be right aligned, and they have to be in reverse chronological order, which means what you did most recently goes at the top, okay? Within a section. Okay, so here's an example of your education section. Those of you that want to let an employer know that you have certain skills, you can absolutely put areas of focus or courses that are relevant to that job in there. This is particularly good if you're going after a research job. If you want to bolster your CV with a part-time research job, yeah, then absolutely put areas of focus so that you can go after that research job. As I said, we talk about experience. We have the opportunity to really describe it. But describe it in a way that readers are going to quickly understand what you have accomplished and what your impact is. So you'll note here that we start with the job title, doctoral researcher. For you, it would be undergraduate researcher, right? Undergraduate research assistant. Then we we identify the company. If you are working in somebody's lab, you want to describe it as, say, the Sociology Human Research Lab, UCLA, UCLA. Okay? You'll note that we always start with an action verb. Okay? So we track or we work, right? That's really important too. You'll also notice that we use numbers, we use digits instead of characters. Quick tip. The human eye identifies digits before it identifies characters. So, if you want people to really see what your impact is, do not spell out the number 3. Write 3, the digit, okay? Honors and awards, this looks very similar to a CV. These are the things that should not go on a CV or on a resume. Visa status is something, does anybody here have to worry about visa status? Okay, a couple of you do. Do not put your visa status down unless it is favorable. Go after the job, and at some point, if you need your visa sponsored, that will come out, okay? But get as far as you can through the interview process without having to have that conversation. Don't give them a reason to kick you out, right? Now, you will note that a couple of these things probably can be identifiers because of some activity that you've been involved in. That is a decision that you need to make, whether you're going to include that activity or not. So, for example, when I was an undergraduate, I worked for NARAL, which is a pro-choice organization. And I did some really cool things with them. I really honed my project management skills, right? I had to make decisions about whether I was going to include NARAL on my resume because there might be some people that would be offended by the fact that I am pro-choice. Fine. My decision was, and this is a decision that all of you need to make, my decision was that I didn't want to work for an employer who would have a problem with the fact that I was pro-choice. But some people feel that, giving this information to them may discredit them from a job that they really, really want before they have the opportunity to demonstrate that they're worth the job, right? So this is something that you need to think about. Church activities can be viewed that way. If you are a member of an organization that speaks for people of color, that can be viewed that way. If you are an organization that speaks to gender issues or that speaks to sexual orientation issues, right, that can be viewed that way. But I also ask you, would you really want to work for an organization that has a problem with you because you are affiliated with one of these organizations? You have to make that decision, right? Okay, a few things that I want to say. Pitfalls to avoid, thank you. Pitfalls to avoid, regardless of whether you're talking about a CV or a resume, is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to take it back. This is really just about the resume, not about the CV. One size fits all. As I've said, resume should be specific for the job that you're applying for. Inconsistent formatting. This applies to the CV and the resume, okay? However you decide to format it, stay consistent. That will make it easier to read. Telling instead of showing. This is for the resume. You want to be very clear about what your accomplishments are, right? So you don't want to say that you're a good project manager. You want to show me that you're a good project manager because you supervised 3 people on a grant worth $25,000 to ensure that homeless people in LA County had shoes, okay? Duties instead of accomplishments. Accomplishments are that I successfully supervised 3 people, that I administered a $25,000 grant, right? That I was able to distribute 250 pairs of shoes to LA's homeless population. Those are accomplishments, okay? Duties would say, again, that I was a project manager who ran a grant. Not so exciting, right? Okay. If I haven't beaten this into you by now, I'm sorry. We're going to say it one more time. The last thing I want to show you is here, where I talk with you about verbs. Note some of these really great strong verbs: established, wrote, received, coordinated, testified, lobbied. Find good verbs. Use your synonyms. We've talked about results. This is my email address, so you all can email me. I would strongly recommend that you reach out to your career services at your college. They will have people there who can help you work on a CV, work on a resume, and you should take advantage of them, because as far as I know, every college or university in this country has free services to its students. Most of them end when you graduate. So the day you walk off that campus, you stop getting help from them. Take advantage of it now while you're on that campus. That goes for UCLA, absolutely. But you can email me, and I can certainly talk with you via email, okay? I'm going to open it up to questions. I talked really fast, so feel free to say, I didn't understand that. Anybody? Yes?
So when we're talking, sorry, I have a really soft voice. When we're talking for the CV, I was kind of confused on where exactly you would put something like being a president of like an honor society or something of that nature.
That goes under service.
Okay.
And actually, if it's affiliated with your department or with your school, so the College of Letters of Sciences, for example, you would put that under departmental service.
Okay.
Yeah? Yes?
But the same apply, so some of the programs I'm looking at kind of roll into what I do at my job as well, working in a college. So where would that, like, if I wanted to put my work experience on the CV as well, like where would the best place be to put that?
Okay, so if you are paid for it, you don't get to consider it service on a CV. But you can put it under, right under research, you can put relevant work experience. Now, I always use the term relevant. My first job out of UCLA was at Toyota Motor Sales. By the way, they did not have a problem with the fact that I worked at Narrow, or that I was volunteering at Narrow. That was awesome. But you can put it there. Now, when I applied to UCLA for a PhD program, I did not include Toyota because there was nothing that I did there that would speak to my ability to get a PhD in history. But if, for example, you're in higher ed administration, and you are in some way administering grants, or you are working in some way or connected with research that's going on in the department, then absolutely. Now, if you are really involved in research, I would put that under research experience, because that is a better heading than relevant work experience, right? Yes?
One question. What if you have a lot of volunteer experience? I know for the resume you just put whatever pertains to whatever you're applying.
Yeah.
But for the CV, would you put everything there?
Absolutely, yes. There are very few instances where I would not include all of my volunteer activities on my CV, because you've got all the space in the world to do it. And it gives us a much better idea of how you're involved in your community, especially in the social sciences. If you told me that you were applying to a position in neuroscience or biology, and some of your volunteer experience was involved in leading marches or walking dogs at the local, actually, we're not going to go there. But if we were talking about some of your volunteer experience being things that really weren't involved with the neurosciences, I would say don't put that on. But for the social sciences, we are particularly interested in how you contribute to your community, right? Social scientists and humanists are very engaged with how society works. And part of that is how we engage our society as volunteers. So yes. Uh-huh.
Two questions. First, how far back can you go? Like, for example, I have volunteer experience stretching from middle school to high school. Like, do you really want to hear that?
It depends on how old you are. I would say middle school, probably not. But there are some compelling reasons. If you are, say, 22 years old and you're applying to a PhD program, If you did something really compelling in high school, for example, if you organized a shoe drive for homeless people, yeah, that could be really exciting. I recently had a student in who's a master's student who's going for PhD programs, and when she was in high school, she organized for her high school. She did the fundraising drive so that 25 students in her graduating class could go to Washington, D.C. to meet with their representatives. Yeah, you're going to put that on, right? That's awesome. So if you have things like that, then yes. And your second one was?
So my second question would be, so things like publishing and presentations and all of these things, how do you get involved with things like that at the community college level?
That's a good question. And it's a challenge because in those instances, your faculty are probably not doing a lot of publishing. Faculty at the community college level are teachers, first and foremost. That said, a lot of them have PhDs. So sitting down and talking with one of them, they may give you recommendations for ways to get connected with conferences. If you can't do that, then what you know is that when you come into a four-year school, that's something you really want to pay attention to, right? You want to get involved once you get into a four-year school. And you want to position yourself with the writing skills, with the analytical skills that you're gaining in your classes, so that you can take advantage of that as soon as you get into a four-year program. But sometimes at the community college level, you will find faculty who will say, hey, let me hook you up with somebody at the local university, and they can make those kinds of connections for you. Again, back to this idea of networking, right? Reach out to people, use the people you know to meet other people. That sounded awful. Use the people you know. You know what I mean. They can help you develop additional connections, and you can use those to actually start moving into research.
Also, really quick, so how would you suggest continuing a relationship with someone? Like, for example, when you leave community college, it's kind of perhaps awkward to be like, hey, by the way, what's up to your instructor?
So it's better if you develop that relationship when you're actually in his class or in her seminar, right? To go to their office hours, to talk with them, to develop that relationship then. But then I think it's really great once you've come into the four-year university to email them every once in a while and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that, History 2A class has so helped me. I'm taking an upper division seminar right now, and the reading that you had us do was so relevant, right? Or, hey, I just read this article on da-da-da-da-da-da, and I know it's something you're interested in. Have you checked it out? And give them the link, right? So checking in every once in a while and letting them know that they made an impact is really a big deal. Yes?
Going back to what you said about including the community service stuff, how would you talk about like a court-ordered community service? Because I wouldn't want it to have like a stigma on it.
Right. You don't have to say that it's court-ordered.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's nobody that's holding your feet to the fire and saying somebody made me do this.
Yeah.
You did it. You got something out of it. Hopefully you continued doing it after the community service requirement was over. That says that you really developed something out of that, right? But you don't have to say that it's court-ordered.
Okay.
You just did it. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Uh-huh.
So the first question is, I know for resume, for each job title, it's limited to like 3 to 4 like line, so like bullet points. But I don't know, like for CV, do we have like a limit?
Okay, so first of all, if you're talking about your experience and let's say you worked for 2 years in your family's business, and you've done everything from stock the shelves to run the books to manage the clients, right? You may need more than 4 lines. So don't worry about taking up more than 4 lines if it's an important experience that you need to explain. In a CV, it's different. Most of the time, we're not going to have any bullet points at all, okay? If we do put in work experience, we put it in because it's relevant. Like I said earlier, if you've been involved at your community college, say you worked in the library, right? even then, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time. You're going to describe fairly succinctly what you do because they're not going to be as interested in it, okay? Did you have another question?
Yeah, so my second question is, so for resume, so for a job title in like a company, so do you need like a brief, brief sentence to introduce what the company do and like what its job is about, and then like go on with the description of the business?
That's actually a great question. So that's what we call context, right? So if you worked at Target, right, which a lot of us have, there are any number of jobs you could have at Target, right? But everybody kind of knows what Target is. So you may want to explain that you were the seasonal help and you worked in the stockroom, okay? But if you worked for some smaller firm or some smaller organization where it's not clear exactly what that company does, you may need to give a bit of an explanation, right? If, for example, you worked in a research lab, you may very well need to explain that you worked as part of a grant to study the effects of television on kindergartners, okay, before you can say that you administered a $50,000 grant, right? Because we want to know what that grant was for. We want to know what this lab is about, okay? Does that help? Did you have one more?
Oh, no.
Okay. In the back?
If you studied abroad, does that go on the CV as well?
Yes. Study abroad is fantastic to put on a CV. Again, it speaks to your ability to handle new situations. It speaks just as, in many ways, a community college speaks to your ability to handle situations that aren't necessarily familiar or comfortable, right? So absolutely. It also speaks to your ability to think more broadly about the world. Yeah. Yes?
What advice would you give a working professional who has done his master's but lacks research experience, who is possibly thinking of pursuing a PhD but doesn't have that vital component?
Yeah, so I can tell you when I came into my PhD program, I did not have research experience. If you do not have research experience, then you're going to have to demonstrate that your grades, your GRE scores, and your connections, those letters of recommendation, speak to your ability to do it once you get here. If you can find a way in to do research, and this is kind of sneaky, but it happens every day, so I have no problem telling you this. A lot of times people will take a class or two to gauge their interest in getting a PhD, right? So through UCLA, they'll take classes through UCLA Extension, right? And while they're taking a class through UCLA Extension, they will become friends with a professor. And that professor will say, hey, why don't you come on as a research assistant, right? I can't tell you how many people in my history PhD program did exactly that. There were people that had been out of school for several years, and they knew that they needed to develop some connections, they needed to develop some credibility, right? And they may not have gone after the research assistant position, but they absolutely went after that professor with hopes that they were going to get a good letter of recommendation. That's the other thing, is that if you've taken time, and I actually encourage people to take time off before they get their PhDs, because it's smart to know that you really, really want your PhD and not just that it's the next step because you're good at school. But if you have taken some time off, your grades from your undergraduate degree are not going to be as relevant. The kinds of things that you did as an undergraduate are not going to be as relevant because you've spent some time out of school. This isn't a problem if you've only been out for a year or two. But those of us that were out for 10 years or more, it becomes more relevant. Sometimes the best way is to come back in and take a class or two. Some people even go for a master's degree before they go into a PhD program, just to kind of demonstrate that I can do the research, I can do the writing, I can handle the seminars, and by the way, I've got letters of recommendation that are dated 2 months ago that say that I can do this, right? Okay? Yes?
So
would you recommend, I know most people when they get an undergrad, they get their bachelor's and then they get their master's and then PhD, but I know that some people have done it to where they went straight from bachelor's to PhD, so would you recommend that, especially for someone who's like an older, non-traditional student?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. And I think that's a great way to go. You don't need to dork around with a master's degree if you know you want your PhD. Okay? And I think, am I out of time?
Oh no, sorry, I just had a question.
Okay. One last question then.
So for a CV, say you, or a resume, say you're very involved in one department, but you're also really involved in another department, and you have like awards and stuff, do you still include that, or would you?
Absolutely. Yes.
Even though it's not relevant? Like,
Oh, yeah. Do you know, my undergraduate degree was in history and economics, and I had a lot more going on in economics than I did in history, but I've absolutely included all of that stuff. It showed that I was really involved on campus, even if it was 10 plus years ago. I'm going to have to let you go because you're going to have another speaker, but it was great to be able to introduce this subject to all of you. And feel free to reach out to me if you need to, if you have further questions. I'm really excited to know that we've got some great, new, exciting people excited to be a part of the social sciences. So good luck, everyone.